Are we live?
Yes, sir, we are live. Yes, we are live.
Okay. Good evening, all. I, Shreya Gupta from Torrent Pharma, welcome you all to today's program. Delayed diagnosis, underdiagnosis, and undertreatment have led to huge prevalence of osteoporosis and osteoarthritis in India. Considering the current scenario, where doctor-patient physical meetings are practically impossible, what is the best advice that an HCP can give to his or her patients so that the conditions can be better managed and complications tackled? Can the approach be to tweak the disease algorithms or provide better digital awareness to patients and other healthcare workers, making them more self-aware to take precaution and adequate care to manage these conditions? As the challenges rise, we have on board our experts. Our moderator for today, Dr. Ajoy SM, our esteemed panelists, Dr. Armugam and Dr. KD Tripathi. Let me start by welcoming our moderator for the day, Dr. Ajoy SM. Dr. Ajoy is a consultant orthopedic surgeon from the famous MS Ramaiah Memorial Hospital, Bangalore. He did his undergraduate and postgraduate from Bangalore Medical College and Research Institute. He has done his fellowship in adult reconstruction surgery from NUH Singapore. He has fellowship in foot and ankle surgery from Switzerland and USA. He is the former EC member and head of research committee of the IFAS. He has been elected as an honorary secretary of IFAS 2018-20. Elected as also the secretary of the Bangalore Orthopedic Society 2019-20. He has been the coordinator and QCO of the Ramaiah Tissue Bank. With more than 85 presentations and 9 publications to his name, today Dr. Ajoy SM is present with us to moderate this session. Over to you, Dr. Ajoy. I request you to please introduce our panelists.
Yeah, okay. So good evening, everybody. And I'm glad, first of all, I would like to thank Torrent Pharma for having me in here as a moderator for this session. See, all along, we had been doing so many, I had been part of webinars wherein we were discussing predominantly orthopedic surgeries and different kinds of things of that kind only. But none of them was actually based on something like pure sciences, is how to improve the actual patient's overall general condition. So a topic like this, wherein we are discussing about osteoarthritis and treatment and osteoporosis and treatment, which makes our patients fit and fine to undergo whatever we are going to do, I think this was actually the need of the hour. And I'm so glad that Torrent has come up with this, and I'm glad to be a part of this. And let me just go on and introduce the speakers for today. We have Dr. Armugam Subramaniam, who is from the Bharati Raja Specialty Hospital at Chennai. So he has been in the field of orthopedics for quite some time now. A senior member, has performed significant number of hip and knee arthroplasties. That's more than 3,000, which is commendable. And he's been awarded by the former governor of Tamil Nadu for Vocational Excellence Award, and also from the Rotary International. So, which means to say that apart from having also the first one to be performing the guided personalized surgery of a bilateral total knee, and being faculty member at so many cadaver courses and knee arthroplasty courses at Malang and Indonesia. He's also been the faculty at many of the OSSCon, Pediatric, the Pondicherry Orthopedic Association, and many of the national and international conferences, a member of the AOS, APAS, and CICOT. And he is a faculty member also for associated with the DePuy programs, so which is very good. And he has been a faculty at the ROC also. The Ranawat Orthopedic Conference is one of the best of its kinds, which is being held in India. So I think held every year in the month of January. I think it's almost 17 years now at that conference. 2003 was when I had first attended that, when it was first conducted.
Right.
That's right. I think it's good to see that you are from there. So Dr. Armugam, please welcome you. And then with us also, sir, and let me just introduce Dr. Tripathi also. Dr. Tripathi is from the KWHC and Sports Injury Center at Allahabad or Prayagraj, as we now know it. He's also a very senior orthopedic surgeon and has been invited to many places across India and abroad. So he's been at Liverpool, Wrightington, where is where we would so call it, the Nine Wells Hospital at Dundee also, and at the SGH Singapore. And he's been invited to all these centers. He's a consultant orthopedic surgeon at many of the hospitals in Allahabad. So he's known for his closed and mini incision surgeries on long bone fractures and many of the advanced arthroscopic surgeries, various fixations, and including hip and knee replacements and resurfacing. He's organized many national and international seminars and conferences at Allahabad, and has been also a prominent member presenting many guest lectures in various conferences and has many national and international awards and fellowships. Dr. Tripathi, please welcome to this webinar too. Okay, so I'm sure that we will have a very enriching experience here on today. And can we just start off with Dr. Armugam's thing on osteoarthritis now? So please, Dr. Armugam, please.
Thank you. That was a very pleasant sort of hello from the company as well as Dr. Ajoy. Thank you for the warm introduction. And I'm going to start sharing my screen. First of all, I would like to thank Torrent for organizing such a beautiful meeting. And I hope people who are watching are enlightened a wee bit. We will share our experiences and hope it is of some use. Just a minute.
Yes, screen is live. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm Dr. Armugam. I'm from Chennai, the hottest place in India as of now, and it's really boiling over here. So I'm going to start talking about osteoarthritis and evolving patient management. So what direction are we going and where are we headed towards? So once we are around about the age of 40 to 50, we start worrying about our joints. Supporting joint health becomes important whether there is discomfort or not. So said by a nutritionist. So what is osteoarthritis? It is a disease of the cartilage degradation, which results in pain in major joints. Usually the knee joint, which is most commonly involved. The hip is not very commonly involved. In us Asians, we have less of the primary hip OAs and more of the primary OA of the knees. So whenever I'm talking about OA, consider it the knee that I'm talking about, and the hips will be very, very less. And today I'm not going to talk much about the hip at all. So it is going to be more of the knees. So it is commonly referred to as wear and tear of the joints. The most common symptoms are joint pain and stiffness. So what happens? Usually the cartilages degenerate and new cartilage is formed. So there is an anabolism and a catabolism. So the cartilage matrix synthesis happen and cartilage matrix degradation happens. Once there is a good balance, there is no problem. When there is more of cartilage matrix degradation, then the problem arises. So chondrocytes produce the structural matrix containing the collagen and the protoglycans. When there is more of catabolism, then there is degeneration that will start in and set off the osteoarthritic changes. Interleukin-1 is a potent pro-inflammatory cytokinin which is capable of inducing chondrocyte and synovial cells to synthesize MMPs. So interleukin inhibits synthesis of collagen type 2 and proctoglycans and growth factors and beta-stimulated chondrocyte proliferation. So what is osteoarthritis and what is the inflammation? So when cartilage destruction happens, there is a little bit of inflammation. When inflammation does occur, there is a lot of inflammation of the neighboring tissue also. There is synovial inflammation and because of the cartilage degradation. And when this cartilage degrades, there is debris inside the joints, and that will end up making the bones damaged and the joint discomfort as well as loss of mobility. What is the pathogenesis? Progressive destruction and loss of articular cartilage with accompanying periarticular bone response leads to exposure of subchondral bone. Once the subchondral bone is exposed, that is when the pain is actually felt. The hyaline cartilage is avascular, aneural, and alymphatic. So chondrocytes have the longest cell cycle in the body. So regeneration of the chondrocytes takes the longest in the body. So this is how a normal knee will look. This is a beautiful articular cartilage. This is a cadaveric photograph. So this is the articular cartilage of the femur, and this is the articular cartilage of the tibia with the ACL as well as the meniscus. So this is how a normal knee will look. And this is how an arthritic knee will look, wherein the cartilage is completely damaged. You have the raw bone exposed over here, as well as on the superior aspect, as medial, lateral, as well as the superior. This is a tricompartmental osteoarthritis, which we commonly see during our TKRs. So this is the worst case scenario as far as the arthritic knee is concerned. How will you diagnose OA of the knee? X-rays, a standing weight-bearing X-ray is very, very important, and that gives more more information than even an MRI would. Initial stages, in stage 1, stage 2, MRI does have a role. In later stages, when the patient is in stage 3 to stage 4, wherein the patient is ready to go for a TKR, then MRI doesn't have any role whatsoever to play. A standing X-ray and a full-length X-ray is all that is required to say at what stage the patient's osteoarthritic changes are and what is the kind of treatment that the patient will require. If it is surgical, then we have 2-3 options. If it is very, very early and if the patient is still young, we have an HTO. High tibial osteotomies can be done, or if it is just a medial compartment, then unicondylar TKR, that is unique knees, can be done. And if it is a tri-compartmental, then total knee replacement can be done. So all this will come into the surgical management at a much later stage, wherein only the X-rays will have a role and not the MRIs. In initial stages, MRI does have a role. Okay. So, and the lab test, the blood test, as well as the joint fluid analysis. What do they have to show? The blood test usually in OA knees, the RA factor as well as the anti-CCCP as well as antibody are negative. And usually the ESR and the CRP are in normal levels. In the synovial fluid analysis, the viscous with low turbicity and CPPD and calcium phosphate will be seen. In RA, the RA factor and anti-CCCP as well as antibody will be positive, and ESR and CRP will be elevated. So this is just to diagnose, this is to give you a differential diagnosis between the osteoarthritic knee or the RA knees. So this is a typical OA knee wherein the there is joint line narrowing over here. There is subchondral sclerosis. You have bone-to-bone contact, as well as you have marginal osteophytes inside the joint, as well as at the medial and lateral aspect of the tibia. So what are the risk factors for osteoarthritis? Risk factors are obesity, female, muscle weakness, and genetics. So these are the common factors which are involved in setting in of the osteoarthritis. Usually obese patients are very easy for them to set into osteoarthritis. Female, as everybody knows, are more prone. Whenever we do a TKR, if you take 100 TKRs, we have close to 80 to 90 of them as women, and 10 to 15 or 10 to 20% are only men. So female are more prone. Muscle weakness, again, if the patients are very obese and they are not used to regularly exercising, then muscle weakness will also be a problem. And genetic, if there is a genetic predisposition, that is if familially, if their parents or grandparents are having osteoarthritis, then they are very prone. So what are the risk factors? Again, the same thing in age, that is wear and tear of the joint, muscle wasting, family history, obesity, lifestyle, and microfractures. What are microfractures? See, usually what happens is when you're a very, very active person, there are small cracks that happen because of small injuries in your cartilage, in your articular cartilage. When this happens, this slowly widens and causes an increase, multiple multiple microfractures, they all unite together, forming a bigger chondral defect. And that will slowly enlarge and lead into osteoarthritis. So microfractures are also one of the risk factors wherein there is hyperutility of the joint that can also lead to severe osteoarthritis. If you see elderly hockey players or football players, they will have a lot of running and on rough surfaces. So their knees are prone to microfracture of the articular cartilage, and that can also lead to osteoarthritis. So what is that you can do in the initial stages? Well, we have medicines that we can give. Lifestyle changes in early stage. See, you have 4 stages as far as osteoarthritis is concerned. Stage 1 is mild, wherein lifestyle changes, just regular exercising, avoiding sitting on the floor, and regular walking, not climbing steps. These kinds of small changes, taking care of their weight, and strengthening exercises of the muscles around the knee will be more than enough. But once they go into a moderate or a stage 2 kind of arthritis, then they will require some kind of pharmacological intervention. These are, we have topical agents, and we have NSAIDs and etrocoxib. Nutraceuticals, well, there are a lot of nutraceuticals. I'm going to talk about a few of them which are more in vogue right now. And antidepressants, when this mostly is required in elderly, that is in the elderly age group, who are very dependent and who are closer to stage 3 to stage 4 kind of arthritis. And intra-articular therapy is again a big talk by itself, so I will cover as much as possible, and I will try to keep it as short as possible as well. So non-pharmacological exercise, non-pharmacological, as I told you, exercises, that is aerobics and muscle strengthening, reduction in adverse factors, that is weight loss. The more you weigh, the more difficult it is for your knees to get better. That is a small thing, just like climbing steps involves around about 3 times your body weight. The amount of exertion that your knee will take is around about 3 times your body weight. So if you are around about 80 kilos, so the amount of pressure that your knee will take when you're climbing the steps is anywhere between 240 to 250 kilos. So if you are 60, then the amount of pressure is well lesser than 200 kilos, and that will sort of not will help in your knees not wearing off very, very fast. Pacing of activities, not very fast, but speed walking, cycling, appropriate footwear, and in worst cases, supportive devices, thermal modalities, heat and cold therapies, all this help in your knee to get a little bit of comfort. And obesity control, as I told you, weight is one of the major killer. And if my patients are over a high BMI, or BMI of over 40, then I don't operate on such patients anymore. We ask them to reduce their weight, because the risk factors associated with TKR for patients over the BMI of 40 is very, very high. So we ask these patients to reduce their weight. Either they go in for a surgery and then reduce their weight, and then they come back for a TKR much, much leaner, and that helps in their post-op recovery also. So what are the key concerns that we have in the present treatment of OA? Good cartilage production. Now I'm talking about pharmacological or nutraceuticals that we have, and what is good and what is beneficial, and duration of the benefits of the treatment and long-term benefits. So undenatured type 2 collagen in joint health. So we are having a few studies which we are going to show. A few of these slides are shared by the company. So these studies are done by them, and that it has been shared with me. So I'm showing you a few slides from the company as well. So COX-2 inhibitors and NSAIDs, they do not help in treatment of osteoarthritis. They surely do help in giving the patients a little bit of comfort and reduction of pain, but they do not help in the repair mechanism of the joints. The NSAIDs inhibit the repair mechanism of the joint. They do not help in the synthesis, and they suppress the synthesis of type 2 collagen. NSAIDs block healing. So NSAIDs usually help in the reduction of pain. So long term, if the patient is suffering from osteoarthritis, giving a patient, you always do give NSAIDs, but keep it as short as possible, so that it doesn't help in the regeneration of the cartilage. cartilage. So have we been able to protect the articular cartilage? The articular cartilage, the cellular compartment of the compartment of the chondrocytes is less than 5%, and extracellular component consists of 95%. So we have to go in with a multinodal management of osteoarthritis. This is what I have shortly briefed you about. So in the initial stages, stage 1, you go in with exercises, education, and weight loss. These are the main things that you do non-pharmacologically. Pharmacologically, in the initial stages, you give them with you go with mild NSAIDs, and again, all the initial exercising as well as weight loss is still used. I mean, is still advised, and topical application of capsium or any other analgesic ointment is always advised. And in intraarticular injections, you have intraarticular corticosteroids or intraarticular hyaluronic acid or viscosupplements. There are one too many in the market, and this is widely used in early stage 2, and sometimes if we don't have an option, in early stage 3 as well. But these injectables have been studied only in stage 2 and late stage 1 cases, and they have shown very, very good support. As well as, and we have glucosamine, chondroitin. I don't use much of all that. Diazerine. There are a lot of other supplements which are available. I will come to a few a little later. And surgically, we have arthroscopic lavage and debridement, but now it is more or less thrown out of the window. Not many surgeons opt for this because they have seen that it doesn't help much. And then osteotomy with axis correction. We have in young patients, if the patient is around, in their 40s or early 50s, when we consider them too early to go in for a TKR, then HTO is an option. Or else, if there is severe bone-to-bone osteoarthritis and it is only a single compartmental, again, we have to see how active the patient is, and we have to give them an option of an HTO or a UKA, either a unicondylar knee replacement or a HTO. And if everything is tried and tested and the patient is over 50 and severely arthritic, and the patient is not able to withstand the pain, nor can he go on with the daily activities, then TKR is the only option, and they go in with a total knee replacement, and which has been one of the most successful procedures. Now coming to type 2 collagen, the most abundant protein of the cartilage making. So it is found in abundance, and native type 2 collagen is triple helix structure. So native undenatured form is usually given at the dose of around 40 milligram, and it decreases the collagen destruction. But what was previously available was denatured, and the collagen size was very small, and the only action was anabolic effect, and it increases the collagen production. So these are the two different ways, and right now type 2 is started being available pretty commonly, and my patients have been having a good experience with type 2 collagen. The WOMAC as well as VAS scores with type 2 collagen has been good, as well as the range of movements with the step mill procedure. The range of movements has shown improvement with type 2 collagen. So daily supplementation with 40 milligram of undenatured type 2 collagen supports joint function and joint flexibility, allows greater knee extension, and has the potential to elevate the joint pain that occasionally rises from strenuous exercises, help to lengthen the periods of pain-free exertion. So small doses, minimum 3 to 6 months is useful, and it has got a unique mechanism of action, and it is tolerated orally. So what are the other nutrients required to both OA as well as osteoporosis? Calcium, native undenatured collagen, it improves in joint flexibility as well as mobility. Vitamin C contributes to normal collagen function, and vitamin D contributes to maintenance of normal bone and muscle function. Zinc, manganese, and copper all help. These help in fighting both osteoarthritis as well as osteoporosis. So investigational. Why I'm saying investigational? Because it is still in the gray area. We are still not sure so as to how much of an effect it actually has. So what are the investigational injections that can be given intraarticularly? These are the intraarticular steroids, hyaluronidase, cartilage transplants that involves 2 steps, as well as PRP injections, as well as stem cell therapy. Steroids, now the usage of steroids has reduced. When I use steroids nowadays is when I have to reduce the or say if the patient is in stage 3 arthritis and they have to go in for a TKR, but they are not able to go in because of some familial reason, and they have another 3 to 4 months before they go in for a TKR. That's when I usually advocate intraarticular steroids. I don't usually advocate that for younger age group patients. Hyaluronidase injections, yes. Cartilage transplant, I don't have much of an experience with that. PRP injections and stem cell therapy, yes, but there are still studies going on to give me a convincing answer whether they are very good in the long term or no. So I've talked to you about the intraarticular injection. Arthroscopy, what can be done? Cleansing and removing of the debris from the joint, then removing any free floating pieces of bone or cartilage from the joint, smoothing of the rough or irregular joint surfaces, and limited removal of inflamed tissue in the larger joints. This was what can be done, but nowadays many of us have given up arthroscopy for treatment of osteoarthritis. It was done, a lot of cleaning and removing debris was thought to be very helpful, but it is on the decline now. So what do we see when inside the knee joint? We see, usually this is how the normal knee joint is. This is the femoral articular surface. This is the tibial articular surface with the meniscus. This is how a normal knee joint will look. But this is when the knee is very arthritic. This is the femoral condyle, wherein the bone is completely exposed, cartilage is completely damaged, and you have a lot of inflamed synovial tissue in you when you put your scope in. So this is autologous chondrocyte implantation. It is very promising, but it is more for a damage due to sport injury or something like that, wherein a part of the chondrocyte can be taken out, grown outside, and can be reimplanted into the joint. When can we take the patient up for surgery? So usually it depends on the joint and the when medical management completely fails. So usually when the knee as well as the hip is involved, we usually go in with the hip first and then the knee. So when medical management has completely failed, then we think about going in for a surgery. And whichever severe, whenever the joint pain is very severe, and when there is pain at rest, when the patient says that the patient is having pain even when he's sleeping, that is when we actually we advise them for going in for surgeries. Severe restriction of movements, severe deformity, and when all other modalities of treatment fail, TKR is the only option. It's one of the best possible options as well. So in the normal knee, this is how your X-ray will be. And in an arthritic knee, the joint is completely eroded and there is bone-to-bone arthritis. And this is how it will look after a total knee replacement is done. So the surgical technique as far as total knee arthroplasty is concerned, what are we looking at? As surgeons, we look at the implant. We choose whichever implant will be right for the patient depending upon the age and the longevity that we are expecting the implant to remain and the range of movement that the patient will require. And we do a complete preoperative planning with their X-rays, and usually we decide on the surgical exposure as well as the soft tissue as well as bony cuts that are required depending upon the X-ray. So this is how a preoperative X-ray is. This is how the patient preoperatively is. And once the surgery is done, the deformity is completely corrected. This is the X-ray of the same patient preoperatively and postoperatively. And why should you not delay going in for surgery? If the patient is in stage 3 or stage 4 arthritis, and even if he's in his late 50s, the more you delay, the more the patient is going to get into complications. What will happen? There will be fractures that can happen over the medial tibial condyle. So there can be stress fractures that can happen. So that will complicate the surgery, wherein we'll have to use additional wedges. And when stem extension and wedges are used, the longevity and the expense is going to go up, and longevity of such implants will be lesser than when regular implants are used. And the patient with severe arthritis, the fitness level will go down, and with age they are always going to go into hypertension as well as diabetes. So even if it is a varus knee, wherein the medial aspect of the medial joint, medial side of the joint is more worn out and the patient is having severe varus, it can be corrected. Valgus, when it is the other way around, it can be corrected and the patient's leg can be made absolutely straight. And even when the patient is having these flexion deformity, or these are just x-rays showing how the patients can be, whatever be the deformity, it can be corrected. So OA in young patient, if non-surgical management fails in young patients, then unicondylar total knee replacement or a HTO are the only other options. I spoke to you in brief about the two, and this is how a UK will look, and this is how a HTO will look. So, and if everything fails when the patient is old, I'm just going to show you a video of a patient who's walking badly prior to surgery, and so a patient comes to you like this with severe OA of both the knees and bad deformity, FFD, varus, and the patient is short. You can see the patient is around about 4.5 feet, and the varus and FFD is very, very severe. Even when such patients come, they can be operated. I did a bilateral knee for her, both at one go, and this is 1 month after surgery. So the same patient, although she is short, but she's much taller than what she was when she came to me. So I did a bilateral knee for her, and she's, after a month's time, she's walking very well and very comfortably, and her range of movements also is very, very good. So in conclusion, stage 1 osteoarthritis, you have physical therapies, exercises, reduction of body weight, all this will help. In stage 2, we have medicines, and we have a lot of nutraceuticals that are available in the market, out of which UC2 is very, very helpful. And in stage 3 arthritis, in early stage 3, if the patient is young, you have an HTO or a UKA that can be done. In late stage 3 arthritis, TKR can be done, and very successfully, and we can give the patient a good knee for them to walk with for the rest of their life. So with this, I end my talk, and over to Dr. Ajoy, or are we taking questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Armugam. This was excellent. That was a wonderful presentation wherein you took us through completely the whole pathology of the osteoarthritis and the treatment options which are available for each one of them. And I think, can we take, like we had just discussed, I think some questions which are just pertinent to osteoarthritis. I thought maybe we could just have them, a couple of them here. So with regard to the injections itself, about intraarticular injections, I think there was one query which had come in, and this was from Dr. Annamalai. Okay, this is like, yeah, how to prevent further progression with MSC stem cells intraarticular injection combined with offloading and non-weight bearing movements help? Do we have any trials on that?
See, we
mesenchymal
personally,
stem cells.
yeah, mesenchymal stem cells, I personally don't have a study on it, but yes, if it is stage 2 osteoarthritis, see, there are a lot of, that's what I was talking during my talk about, a lot of trials going on. So there is no hard and fast rule that there are a lot of trials as far as PRP is concerned. There are a lot of trials as far as MSM is concerned. So mesenchymal cells, yes. Yeah, mesenchymal stem cells, yes, they do play a role. But when they are given with ACI, so chondrocyte implantation with mesenchymal cells, they do have a more positive long-term studies. I have few slides on that as well. Should I go through it, or we will see that later?
I think we have time. I think we can see them. I think it's about 5:30. Yeah, we can see a couple of them.
Yeah. Okay. I will try, and I will share it with you. Just a minute. Okay. What's this? Yeah, you can see this, right? So
Yes, we
here,
can. Yes.
here there is a slide wherein I'm showing about autologous chondrocyte implantation. This is more in case of injuries. So we take autologous from the non what do you say, non weight bearing aspect. We take a cartilage, grow it, and then this is reimplanted as shown in the slide. So this is done more in case of sports injuries rather than for primary OAs. So there is lot of studies that are there for younger patients, but in older patients for OA, see, when it is an 18-20-year-old wherein you have a osteochondritis dissecans or you have a huge kind of a defect post-traumatic, the chondrocyte ACI is the only option. And now there are more advances as far as ACI is concerned. This is the first generation ACI. Nowadays they don't go in for a two stage, they go in for a single stage, wherein they have different kind of scaffolds for ACI substracts. So there are different classes. These are the 4 classes that are available. Again, everything is still in very what do you say, we don't have a very long term and concrete kind of a convincing kind of a study. There are osteochondral allografts that can be used. Again, these
Yeah.
are for when there is a bone as well as the cartilage completely taken off or come off. But this again is more commonly used only in sports injuries,
Correct.
not much so in osteoarthritis. How was your experience, Dr. Ajoy, as far
Yeah, that's what.
as
No. With regard to osteochondral allografts and all, I think they're predominantly reserved for the younger patient and the
yeah,
ones where we are
see, this
basically like
kind of,
buying time. Those kind of, yes,
yeah, so
quite right. I
this,
think it's
yeah, this is
right.
what we do in more of sports injuries and less in
Or
osteoarthritis. Yes. So
correct, some kind of a localized, yeah, some kind of a
yeah,
localized articular. I think so. That would be
yeah,
better rather
mostly
than
in the femoral aspect wherein there is severe defect like this is what we do. So but
right.
as far as in osteoarthritis is concerned, not much. So
Right.
that's what I feel. PRP injections and visco supplements, they all have a role in maybe delaying the eventual TKR.
Inevitable, correct.
Yeah,
Inevitable surgery which you hear it's all.
eventual
That would be
inevitable TKR. But per se, as far as treatment is concerned, I am not I mean, I'm still not very convinced because I'm a replacement surgeon, so
no,
maybe
no, no,
my idea
no,
is a
no,
little
no.
biased,
That does
but I have seen that they don't play much of a role, to be very honest.
right. Right. And apart from that, there are a couple of questions on this one also. I think Shilpa has been sharing it on the chat also. Shreya
Yeah,
has been
okay.
sharing it on chat also. So one is like one they want to know is how should I prescribe collagen type 2 to my patients? That's one of the questions. Then there is one on the NSAID which is the NSAID recommended in the presence of OA with acid peptide disease, I think, and how long should an
In case
analgesic
of
antithesis be given? Yeah.
for how long should analgesic anti-inflammatory given? Which ones do you prefer? See, personally,
Yeah.
I prefer aceclofenac, and I usually give it only when there is an acute exacerbation, wherein I give the patient for 5 days to a week, and not more. And usually they are, and then I give them some kind of nutraceutical, which is going to supplement and that is going to take care of the analgesic. I mean, take care of little bit of the healing as well as the anti-inflammatory work over from the analgesics. So usually 5 to 7 days, not longer. And usually I give the UC2s for around about 3 months, and we have to clearly tell them that it is not going to show any effect for a short time. It will start showing effect only little later, and the longer they take, it is better, and UC2s can be given. And as far as the NSAID recommended in OA with APD, I personally prefer etrocoxib. How about you, Dr. Ajoy?
Yeah, I also use toricoxib only sometimes, or I
Yeah,
go in for piroxicam. I think somehow
yeah,
I'm more
right.
convinced about that than going for the toricoxib. I think with that the recent, there was some study while this thing was taken back, rofecoxib was withdrawn.
Yeah,
Valdecoxib
rofecoxib was taken back because of because of the fluid retention.
Cardiac side effects,
cardiac side effects and water retention as well as renal problems. Yeah. So I have been using etrocoxib, and I have been very comfortable with it, and so have my patients. So in case of APD, yes, I do use etrocoxib. And how long should I prescribe collagen? You can prescribe anywhere between 3 to 6 months.
3 months is totally right. Yeah, I think so. We're almost 5:40 there now. So can we? Yeah, we'll take questions as and then they come later again afterwards. Now, shall we go on to Dr. Tripathi? And you would be telling us about osteoporosis. So, can we move on to Dr. Tripathi?
My presentation. Just a minute. This one.
Yes, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, we are very much.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
So, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Torrent, for giving me this opportunity to interact with Dr. Ajay and Dr. Armugam and all our colleagues all over India. I think the osteoporosis is the medical problem, but since we treat the fragility fractures, the osteoporotic patients, they just come to us day in and day out in our outpatient and outdoor services. So I think we must have an overview of the medical management of osteoporosis. Before coming to the medical management, we must have the review of a little bit pathophysiology. The bone unit is, as we all know, is osteon, and majority of it is having inorganic part, and the 30-35% has the organic matrix. The matrix has cells as well as the protein. The cells like osteoblasts, and osteocytes, they are embedded in the matrix, which is made up of the collagen 1. That is, in the cartilage you have collagen 2, here it is collagen 1, and the other proteins, glycoprotein, osteon, calcium, osteonectin, osteopontin, this is the organic matrix. And on the other side, in the inorganic one, we have the calcium and phosphate in the form of hydroxyapatite. How exactly is the calcium homeostasis maintained? It is maintained by parathormone, that it brings the low calcium to the normal, while the calcitonin, it brings the high calcium into the lower level at the normal level. What we have, the hypocalcemia, the lower calcium in the blood, that stimulates the parathormone, and this parathormone acts at 3 levels. One, at the vitamin D, it activates vitamin D in the kidney and liver, 125 hydroxylation, and then it acts, that vitamin D acts on the GIT, that is jejunum, and absorbs the calcium from the gut. On the other side, it acts on the kidney directly, and the calcium reabsorbed in the exchange of the phosphate. And on the bone, there is a reabsorption from the osteolysis and osteoclastic activity, and finally this osteolytic and osteoclastic activity that triggers bone formation, and it gives the increased alkaline phosphatase in the blood. How PTH resorbs the bone? The parathormone actually acts on the osteoblast, not on the osteoclast. These osteoblasts, they produce rank ligand, and this rank ligand interacts with the rank receptors on the osteoclast and activates the osteoclast, which finally causes the resorption. Like denosumab, it acts inhibiting the rank ligand, thus it prevents the activation of osteoclast. What are the functions of bone cells? Osteoblasts secretes the osteoid matrix, and then the mineral is deposited on them. Then finally it makes the osteon, and it is basically the bone forming markers which found in the osteoblast, that is the alkaline phosphatase and collagen 1. And on the other side, in the osteoblast, it reabsorbs Then once it reabsorbs, there is remodeling effect from the osteoblasts, and then on the monocyte giant cell, this is formed by the osteoblasts, and their markers raised on their side is the TRAB and CA, hydroxyproline and hydroxylysine. What exactly is the defect in the bone? Whether it is on the osteoid, that is the mineral side, or on the osteoid side. In the osteoid side, you have defect in the osteoblasts, or you have the defect in the osteoblast. If you have defect in the osteoblast, it increases that Paget's disease, and on the other side, if the osteoblasts are decreased, it produces the osteopetrosis. On the matrix side, if there is defect in the procollagen, it is basically like osteogenesis imperfecta. There is defect in the procollagen, and if there is defect in the enzyme like vitamin C that causes that does not change from procollagen to collagen, that is the scurvy. So these are the defects of the organic matrix. On the other side, if there is defect in the mineral, particularly if you have problem with the mineralization, then you have rickets and osteomalacia because of the problems in mineralization, and on the other side there is a primary and secondary parathyroid problem. But as you see in the osteoporosis, there is no defect at all. It is defect both sides, on the osteoid as well as on the mineral side. So coming to the osteoporosis as such, osteoporosis is a silent killer. It is a disorder of bones in which bones become brittle, weak, and easy to damage, broken, and decrease in the mineralization and the strength of the bone over time causes the osteoporosis. The osteoporosis is more in the women in comparison to the male population. Here you can see the defect in the osteoid or defect in the mineral. If there is a defect in the osteoid, you can have the scurvy kind of disease. If there is a defect in the mineral part of the bone, you have the rickets and osteomalacia. But in osteoporosis, you can see both the osteoid as well as the inorganic part is suppressed, but the bone is having good in quality. It is only the problem of the quantity. The quantity of the bone, that is rarefaction of bone has occurred, and that is histologically the bone is not defective. If you see what we have the balance of osteoblastic activity and osteoclastic activity. So we have the equal resorption and bone formation. But as we age, there is a decrease in the osteoblastic activity, that is the bone formation, but bone resorption continues. That is how gradually osteoporosis develops. What we have the peak bone mass at around 20 to 30 years of age. But as we age, there is a decrease in the peak bone mass, and in the females, usually there is a dip around 40 to 50 years of age, that is the perimenopausal, and in the male gradually it goes slowly in the same pace. There is a age-related bone loss. The rate of bone loss increases in both men and women around 40 to 45 years of the age. Bone loss is more pronounced in women because of the hormonal change occurring with the menopause. Bone loss is accelerated to 2 to 5% each year immediately before and for up to the 10 years post-menopause. Estrogen deficiency hastens the loss of bone in the post-menopausal women. What is the Indian scenario? The number of osteoporotic hip fractures has quadrupled in past decade. 1 out of 3 females in India suffers osteoporosis, and about 10 million of patients are added every decade, and by 2050, 1 out of 2 hip fractures would occur in Asia. A woman's risk of developing osteoporosis-related hip fracture is equal to her combined risk of developing breast, uterine, and ovarian cancer. What are the causes? The most common risk factor is postmenopausal osteoporosis, and the most important cause is the aging, that is the senile osteoporosis. The secondary causes are drugs, prolonged immobilization, hormones, prolonged illness, prolonged weightlessness, smoking, alcoholism, and sedentary lifestyle. What exactly we get in the lab test, as it is physiological process occurring throughout your life, I think the lab is every calcium, parathormone, phosphate, alkaline phosphate, everything is normal. While in the other diseases, like you see in the renal osteodystrophy, there is increased alkaline phosphatase, no excretion of phosphate, so there is increased phosphate. While in the primary hyperparathyroidism, there is increase in the calcium and phosphorus, and in the rickets, again there is increase in alkaline phosphatase. So in the osteoporosis, if there is a laboratory calcium, phosphorus, everything remains normal. So it is basically the quantitative effect, and the clinical features are back pain, fractures. Fragility fractures are the probably presenting symptoms sometimes. And the fractures, spine has a maximum number of patients, followed by hip and then wrist injuries. The round kyphosis, most common cause of kyphosis is the osteoporosis, followed by osteomalacia, and usually we get the codfish vertebra. The collapse of the vertebra gradually causes the round kind of kyphosis. What is the investigation of choice? I think DEXA bone scan is the investigation of choice, and there are two sets of BMD. One is Z-score, that is patients compared with the standardized BMD of same age, sex, and race. In the T-score, patient BMD compared with the young reference adult or normal young adult. WHO defined these BMD that normally is from 0 to -1 standard deviation, -1 to -2.5 is osteopenia, and more than -2.5 is the osteoporosis. And if it has an associated fracture, it goes into the severe osteoporosis. The age is the major risk factor in the osteoporosis. If you see the T-score -2.5, at 50 years of age, the fracture risk is 12%, while same T-score -2.5 at the age of 70, the risk factor is 24%. So the age is a major risk factor in the osteoporotic fractures. Who should have the bone density test? We must do the screening of the bone BMD. Women aged 65 years or men aged 70 years and older, they must be screened. Younger patients, postmenopausal women with the men 50 to 69, with the clinical risk factors like alcoholism, like smoking, and like sedentary lifestyle, they must be screened for the BMD, routine BMD. Adults who have fracture after 50 years of age, adults with the condition of rheumatoid arthritis and ankylosing spondylitis are taking medications like steroid, they must be associated with the low bone mass and they must be screened with the BMD. The clinical challenge, because most of these patients are asymptomatic, so this is the great challenge until the fracture occurs. Even after some fractures, 2 to 3 vertebral fractures, patients are asymptomatic, or very mild back pain. So the challenge to clinicians is to identify these patients of the high-risk fractures and prevent first fracture, how we can avoid these in the osteoporotic patients. Majority of these patients are underdiagnosed and undertreated. The underdiagnosed patients, it was found in the National Osteoporosis Risk Assessment study that 40% patients were osteopenic, 7% were osteoporotic, and 11% were more than one fracture after the age of 45 years. On the other side, the undertreated women meeting criteria of the treatment, 15.7 patient not taking calcium, 18.6 patient not taking vitamin D, 52.7% not exercising more than 2 hours per week, and 35.3% not receiving therapy. That is what found in the NORA study. Identifying the high-risk patient with the clinical practice, our primary goal is to prevent the fractures, select patient based on the risk factors. So just to prevent them from further fractures, what we use the pharmacologic therapy, patient with the osteoporosis by DEXA or with the history of hip or spine fractures. The fracture assessment tool is FRAX is given to assess the quantitative risk assessment, and it helps to communicate these risky patients. Coming to the management, we have non-pharmacological management, pharmacological, and surgical. Prevention against osteoporosis is have a very rich, healthy diet in the calcium, protein, and vitamin D rich diet. Do routine exercises, stop smoking and alcohol, and have a nice good sleep for 6 to 7 hours. I think that gives you the preventive measures against the osteoporosis. The pharmacologic treatment, it is divided into 3 parts. One is that decrease the bone resorption. It is bisphosphonate. This is the drug of choice, and it inhibits the osteoclast directly. And denosumab, it is a monoclonal antibody. It inhibits rank L, and it again suppresses the osteoclastic activity. And the SERM, that is the estrogen receptor modulator, the raloxifene, again it is the osteoprotective. On the other side, we can stimulate the bone formation, the osteoclastic activity, and teriparatide is one of the most important pharmacologic agent which synthesizes the PTH and ultimately stimulates the vitamin D and then activates the bone formation. The strontium rallinate, it is having the combined effect of bone resorption as well as the bone formation, but problem with this is that it is the nephrotoxic, hence it is not being used in the routine practice. The Endocrine Society guidelines have given that postmenopausal women at high fracture risk, particularly patients with the recent fracture, should be treated with pharmacological therapies. A review found that it benefits overweigh the risk. Bisphosphonates, the alendronate, risedronate, zoledronate acid, ibandronate are recommended as the initial treatment. At 3 to 5 years after starting bisphosphonate, fracture risk should be reassessed. Patients at the low to moderate risk at this point may be considered for the bisphosphonate holiday. Denosumab may be considered as an alternate to bisphosphonate as the initial treatment of high-risk postmenopausal women. Fracture risk should be reassessed for 5 to 10 years. Challenging the current approaches, the bisphosphonates have problems like osteonecrosis of the jaw and the esophagitis and GI adverse effects. The selective estrogen receptors, they have associated with deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolism, sometimes the myocardial infarction. Teriparatide can be given no more than 2 years, and the HRT has increased risk of thrombosis and stroke. So the safest is adequate intake of calcium and vitamin D. Adequate intakes of dietary calcium and vitamin D including supplements is necessary. The elementary calcium per day is required about 1,000 to 1,500, and vitamin D is 2,000 international unit per day. The vitamin D has effect on the fall. In addition to its effect on BMD, may contribute to reduction in the fracture risk, improve muscle function, and improves reduction in the risk for falls. The meta-analysis has shown significant reduction in the risk of falling in those taking vitamin D plus calcium versus those taking the placebo. Here is the daily requirement of the vitamin D and calcium at different ages. Vitamin D and bone health. In higher dose trials, vitamin D lowers the risk of fall by 19%. Daily intake of vitamin D supplemented with warranted in all individual age of 65 and older. In the severe vitamin D deficiency and osteomalacia, we can use the Strauss regime, that is 3 lakhs to 6 lakhs international unit intramuscular or oral stead or over 5 days. Or we can give 2,000 to 5,000 international unit for 4 to 6 weeks daily, or weekly 50 to 60,000 international units for 8 to 12 weeks. That is how is the pharmacologic treatment. On the surgical side, we have the vertebral fractures, and we can treat them by vertebroplasty by injecting the methyl methacrylate bone cement or balloon kyphoplasty. In the hip fractures, depending on the fracture, we can do the osteosynthesis or we can replace it. Or in the wrist, we can either treat them conservatively or with the X-fix or with the internal fixation. The locking plates have given enormous good outcome with these fragility fractures. I think that is all about the overview of osteoporotic management. Thank you. Thanks a lot for your patient hearing.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Tripathi. Thank you so much. I think that was an excellent presentation, which took us through everything. It just took us through the different. It took us through the osteoporosis itself, the types, the treatment, and between senile and postmenopausal osteoporosis, the difference, and it also told us what are the ways in which we can treat. Like you can either do something which acts on the osteoblast, enhances bone formation, or the osteoclast reduces the bone resorption, and a combination of the two. So I think all of that, it was a very comprehensive talk, Dr. Tripathi. Thank you so much. Now let us look on to the questions that it has fetched in. So I think one of the questions, I think this is a common question which to both Dr. Armugam and to Dr. Tripathi. This has come from Dr. Ishwar Prasad. So he is asked, if osteoarthritis and osteoporosis both are present, which one needs immediate treatment? And till what level of osteoporosis can one advise a TKR? And in severe osteoarthritis with osteoporosis? It's a combined question. So he is asked to both of you. If both are present, which one needs immediate treatment?
It depends on the, I'll go first. It is like first, if the arthritis is more, then I will take over. And then if the porosis is more, then he will take over. No, just joking. See, if the arthritis is, if the patient is having stage 3 or a stage 4 osteoarthritis of the knee, the porosis is not something we're going to be worried about. Porosis will require treatment, but subsequently. And in case of rheumatoid arthritis, wherein osteoporosis is a part of all the rheumatoid arthritis patients that we operate. Just because the patient's bone is porotic, it's not like we are not doing a TKR. In these cases, we just add a stem extension in the tibial side if it is very, very porotic, or in the femoral side as well, depending upon how bad the bone is. And if the patient is unable to walk, and if the OA is stage 3 or stage 4, I think first TKR needs to be done. And when we are doing the surgery, we will know the quality of the bone, and that will give us a better picture of the stage of osteoporosis as well. And that has to be treated subsequently. If the patient is very, very bad, then teriparatide straight away, or else, as Dr. Tripathi had told us about all the modalities of treatment of osteoporosis, whatever suits fine for that patient, that has to be started, and the treatment continued even after the surgery. That will be my take.
Okay, Dr. Tripathi.
I think I agree with Dr. Armugam that osteoarthritis has more of the pain component than the osteoporosis, and patient comes to us with the complaint of pain. So in the severe arthritis, basically we give them pain relief, and relief can be given with the replacement or whatever modalities we are going to treat. And then osteoporotic treatment is the long-lasting treatment. It's not the one-day treatment. In the osteoarthritis, like we can change the joint, we can make them painless, and then later on we can supplement for the treatment, medical treatment of osteoporosis.
Okay, right. So I think that has answered you, Doctor, quite well, Dr. Ishwar Prasad. I think there's only one this thing that you had asked is up to what level of OP and severe OA can we advise a TKR? I don't think that would probably means if you have a Killian tolerance 4 and you already have an osteoporosis with say a minus 2.5, I think you can still go ahead and perform the TKR. I think that's what
yes,
the answer to that would be. Yeah, I think so. So that is one thing. Then we have more questions coming in now. Okay, there was one which was, and of course, people have been complimenting both of you on your presentations. I think there are quite a few, I think, who have complimented you. And apart from that, very, very good and precise presentations by both speakers. I think this is one thing which has come from Dr. Sudhakar Agara. I think he has said that. And Dr. Atanu Acharya has asked this question as to how long can bisphosphonates be given. I think Dr. Tripathi did mention the interval of 2 years.
3 to 5 years can be given, and then after 3 years you can give them the holiday, because the bone needs the balance. If you stop, you need continuous osteolytic and osteogenic potential. If you are just stopping the osteoclast at the level, I think it becomes the osteoporosis kind of thing. So you need to give the holiday for after 3 years, say 1 year or 6 months or 2 years, whatever, depending on the quality of the bone. Because continuous supplement of this bisphosphonate can cause the fracture of the femur, subtendinic level of fracture of the femur. So that is
I think yes, I think all of us have. I think all of us have been experiencing these in patients who have been taken Alendronate for a long duration. I think.
So you need that drug holiday for after 2 to 3 years.
Right, I think so. Yeah. And the odd thing about that is these are very transverse fractures. I think this is something which is unique to these bisphosphonate fractures. I think then this that answers you well, Dr. Atanu. And after this, Dr. Sunil has asked this question: can denosumab and teriparatide be given together? Dr. Tripathi, would you give both of these together?
I don't think so, because I just if you are giving denosumab and give it for a year or two, and if you are not getting a good result, then you can switch over to the teriparatide.
Okay. Right.
There was another this one also when this one is when the bone is severely osteoporotic and the score is less than -4, they advise give teriparatide for 6 months and then immediately give a denosumab. So it is like 6 months of teriparatide followed by a single shot of denosumab, and then repeat deno after every 6 months. This is this one I read somewhere. So can that be done, Dr. Tripathi?
I think so, but you need a long-term trial on these things, because people are trying, and we need to have the long-term studies, and then if you have the good outcome, then you.
I just saw one paper that said.
That's what.
I think as of now, most of the literature which is currently available with regard to denosumab and all is from the clinical trials which have been done. I think it's not been in use for too long for us to be performing these studies. I think they are more from the clinical studies that have been performed. And there's one on can PTH and bisphosphonates be combined? Can we give teriparatide and bisphosphonates together? Would you find any role for that?
I think I'm not very fond of combining both, but there are few literatures that people are combining these both, but again, they are very controversial issues. It's not not clear-cut guideline on that.
Yeah, it is one of the two. I don't think you combine the two, because though you have each one of them acting in a different way, the teriparatide acting on osteoblasts and increasing the bone, and bisphosphonates acting on osteoclast. I don't think we advocate combining the two of them at any point of time. Dr. Armugam, I think, would
Yeah,
you
I will
agree on that?
completely agree with both of you.
Yes, I think so. I think so. That's what it is, and that's answering Dr. Anita Gidwani. Then what's the role of calcitonin in the management of, I think probably osteoporosis only she's been asking.
I think in the osteoporosis, calcitonin is salmon calcitonin with the nasal spray you can give, and that sometimes it inhibits the osteoclast and can. There is, but again, it's not very popular. People are using the salmon calcitonin in the nasal spray form in the very elderly patients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think they have brought in a very relevant question here. One is, if there are patients in the deeper interiors of India, then they are not able to perform a DEXA scan regularly. What else can they use as a diagnostic tool? Is there anything which can be used?
Yeah, again, like we have to go to our older teachings, like the Singh index of the hip and metacarpal X-rays and spine X-rays and cortical thinning. All these things, comprehensive X-ray screen can be done. I think X-rays are available everywhere. So Singh index, vertebral X-rays, and metacarpal index, and thinning of the cortices, and all these things can be taken.
Yeah, I think so. That's the ideal thing. I think that's quite good. I think it's a wonderful suggestion. So even if you don't have a DEXA which is available to you, I think a simple X-ray itself would be quite enlightening. A properly taken X-ray and a properly studied X-ray would be revealing a lot more about
osteoporosis. And Singh index has a very good correlation with the
correlation, correct, prognostic correlation with fracture center. Right. And somebody has put in this the current COVID lockdown. What are the best recommendations to the patients? It's with regard to osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, or it's in general? I don't know. The question is not very clear.
We will take it in terms of osteoarthritis and osteoporosis.
Right.
I think have good food, good sleep, and good exercises at your I think rooftop or wherever you get. Have the good, because you have plenty of time to do the good exercises with the good calcium and protein rich diet and good sleep. I think that will be preventing you in these COVID times from the osteoporosis.
As far as osteoarthritis is concerned, again, exercise, be it just walking in your terrace and exercising regularly, keeping your muscles around your knee joint healthy. If you have a static cycle, that will be the best possible exercise. And if you, by a swimming pool, I think is ruled out, because even if you have private swimming pools are far and very rare in India. And public swimming pools are a big no-no now. So I think walking in your terrace and regular exercises to strengthen all the muscles around your knee. We can just Google, and there will be so many exercises, and that's the in thing now. Looking at how to do an exercises with a physiotherapist or somebody playing on your TV. So do those exercises regularly, strengthen the muscles around your knee joint, and walk regularly, keep yourself fit, eat healthy, expose yourself to sunlight, and that should be enough to take care of your bones per se. And if you can reduce your weight by a wee bit, I think that will be even more helpful.
I think, like you all, I was also not the indoor exerciser. We used to run 5 to 10 kilometers a day and cycling and everything in the outdoor. But in the COVID times, it is all stopped. So I learned the indoor exercises in these. I have never done indoor exercises, but yoga, muscle stretching exercises, all these exercises I learned these days. And I think these are the excellent exercises as well, apart from our running and cycling and the other outdoor exercises.
If they do, and specifically with regard to osteoarthritis, it's the simplest, the static quadriceps exercises. They probably have time to perform them very religiously now. I think that would be one of the things which could definitely recommend.
Absolutely right.
Right, and this one other thing is probably not related to this. They have been asking, how best can I use telemedicine?
I think telemedicine, in the orthopedic surgery, I don't know, the young generation, next generation, they must be fond of doing this. But as far as I'm concerned, in the orthopedics, clinical examination is the gist of the diagnosis. Even in the, if you have injury in the tibia, upper tibia, you don't know how the compartment syndrome is going to behave, what is the distal pulses, how is the neurovascular examination. All these things cannot be done on the telemedicine. If you suppose, go and sleep and see me tomorrow morning, patient will come with the compartment syndrome and loss of vascularity. And it will be, I think, one patient limb losing is as good as thousands of telemedicine patients. I think I will not recommend.
Okay,
Yeah,
Dr.
yes, very, very nicely put. But going forward, it is going to be part of our lives as well, whether we like it or not. But nothing like actually seeing a patient and examining them and getting to a diagnosis, rather than seeing somebody's video and getting into a diagnosis. So the chances of erring is too much. Nothing like direct physical examination. And but telemedicine with the COVID scenario is here to stay, and we also have to adapt to it. I am also with Dr. Tripathi. I am not for telemedicine, but I have done a few telemedicine consultations myself. But luckily, it was simple things like plantar fasciitis and periarthritis of the shoulder, wherein I could ask the patient to do certain movements and check on it. But otherwise, major problems, telemedicine is not something I will prefer. But we have to adapt. As surgeons, we have to adapt to the present situation. Like any complication we handle inside the theater, here also we have to just adapt to the present scenario and live with it. That's all.
Yeah, what I would definitely recommend to teleconsultation, and I also have utilized teleconsultation now, especially after the lockdown. Prior to that, I was totally I never was available. I don't even have a web presence, so to say. So, but then what did happen was that lot many patients who they were hesitant to come.
Yes.
I was telling them, I'm there in the hospital. You can come down. I'm there. It's not that I'm not. I'm there. You can come down. I can see you. But then they said that in the lockdown we don't have this thing. Then the hospital does issue passes and all. They given them. We have a proper system in place to send a patient a SMS, and then they can show that and come in. But then they would quite hesitant. Then the hospital itself encouraged teleconsultations for these kind of patients. Now, what I find is that patients who are already, we have seen them once in the past, and we just want to review them. Somebody who is on, say, medications for osteoporosis, or he's got some osteoarthritis, and he just still wants to decide whether he wants to undergo surgery or not undergo surgery. I think those are the kind of patients who are follow-ups. We probably know them already, and maybe one or two odd things about them we could definitely pick up just by the teleconsultation. We could renew prescriptions. We could see their reports. I think if they get their investigations done, I think at home there are some collection centers which do in-house collections of blood and all that. So those reports, viewing those reports, those kinds of things probably would play some role. I think so we could at least osteoarthritis and osteoporosis. I think we can definitely treat. Those kind of things. Those kind of things we definitely can. But of course, we would not be able to. Trauma and all definitely would need something.
Yeah, just like how COVID is here to stay without us liking it a lot. Similarly, telemedicine also is here to stay, whether we like it or not.
That's good. Yeah.
Okay. So I think Dr. Shreya has asked a question. Oh, it's Shreya who's asked this question. Okay, how to prepare my patient for such teleconsultation sessions? How do I?
Well, first we have to prepare ourselves. So once we are prepared.
No, to the patients, I think Bangalore, we have a significant population which is tech savvy.
Yeah.
I think more than half of the population is probably working in software and all that. And they're very familiar with all the using of apps. Probably they might be designing them themselves. So if we just recommend teleconsultation, in fact, they're quite happy. Because in Bangalore, my patients do come from far off, so maybe 20, 30 kilometers apart. So for them, it's very convenient. So we need not actually prepare these patients for teleconsultation. We just need to tell that we are not available at this particular moment for regular consultations. We do see emergencies, but then anything that needs to be followed up, or we are available on teleconsultation. And I think patients would definitely, most of them would take it. Some of them don't. Some of them are unfamiliar. Some of them feel that it's very technology intensive and they may not want to do it. But I think definitely that's how we can prepare the patients for teleconsultation. And any other questions which have come in here? No, we don't have. I will just look up on the. Have we got any other questions which have come in? I'll just see through. 50H, okay. Okay. Okay, one of the questions which had come in earlier in the thing was, is a granular form or a capsule form of the collagen, undenatured collagen type 2 more effective regarding compliance?
What form?
Which of them is more is it the granular form or the capsule form which is more compliant?
I think capsule form is more compliant.
I think so too, because
the
it's easier for them to just.
Yeah, capsule form is more compliant. And I think that is easier for them to consume as well.
Right, I think so. So that probably answers your question.
How is your experience, Dr. Ajay and Dr. Tripathi, with UC2?
UC2, I've been using it for some time now, but I use it in combinations. I use that with all the other things. I use those triple masalas that are available. MSM also along with it, and MSM. So
okay. Yeah, there are a lot of cocktails available. Yeah.
Yes, all in one kind of things is what I prefer them to use. Dr. Tripathi, how about you?
I the same about like patient take these pouches with the vitamin D and all these things combined, and they are doing well.
I think one more question has come in.
Yeah, it came in just now. I think both of you could read it. I think it's on chat.
What amount of calcium is required per day in OA versus OP? Should it be standard or dose vary? What amount of calcium is required per day in OA? OA, if the patient is not very osteoporotic, even as less as 500 milligrams would do. But if the patient is osteoporotic, Dr. Tripathi will answer.
I think by and large, the 1000 milligram calcium and 2000 international unit of this vitamin D is the regular requirement for adult patient. Yes. But if it is severely osteoporotic, you can go up to the 1.5 gram, or you can go with up to the 2 gram in the elderly patient with the severely osteoporosis. And the vitamin D, I think you can go with 2000 to 3000 international unit. You can increase the elderly patients or in the patients who are severely osteoporotic with the multiple fractures, fragility fractures basically. Then can dose. But 1000 is the minimum.
Yes.
Yeah, 1000, I think 1250, I think that's how it is available.
Yeah.
With the elemental calcium being 500 milligrams, I think that's what is available. And that with the 2000 international units of vitamin
Definitely.
D, is the recommended dosage. I was just seeing if there's any other thing. Should we allow non-weight bearing movements for 3 weeks?
Or something else has just come
in.
If patient has high platelet count in elderly, what complications can follow in OP cases?
OP is osteoporosis.
Oh, okay. High platelet count.
You just went back to your internship days of OP for me.
Yeah.
Osteoporosis, yes.
So high platelet count and osteoporosis? Is there a connection? I don't see it.
I'm not aware of it. Maybe medically.
Neither have I heard of anything.
Yeah.
So.
Can somebody answer that?
No.
I don't think is there any.
I don't think so.
Correlation.
If you are going to give any anticoagulants or anything like that, post-operatively, or if you're planning this one joint replacement or something, then if the patient is high on platelets, then we
I think
give.
what he's asking about that you cannot give the SERM and all these things, maybe because they have the problem with the coagulation, I think.
Oh, okay. So hormone replacement therapy would probably not be utilized in case
HRD and
older
SERM,
patients.
SERM cannot be.
The ones which have got a
high, I think that's what
propensity to cause a DVT, I think. Those are the ones which we shouldn't be using.
Yeah. That may be the.
I think those shouldn't be used. I think okay. So I think more or less, I think we've taken most of the questions. We have covered most of the things now. I think it's almost 6:25. So thank you both Dr. Armugam and Dr. Tripathi. It was an excellent session we had, both on osteoarthritis and on osteoporosis. Most of the questions were answered. You took us through both the how the osteoarthritis, the different stages which are there, what are the options that we have, non-pharmacological, pharmacological treatments, everything that is available for a patient. I think you took us through all that quite very well. And Dr. Tripathi, also thank you very much for you took us through osteoporosis, the types, the definitions, the what's osteopenia, osteoporosis, and the treatments for each one of them, the varied options of treatment which are available. And an excellent discussion also following that. There were some questions very pertinent. There were questions asking us regarding the present day times, the present day situations and scenarios, how we are tackling most of it. I think all in all, it was a wonderful webinar wherein we would look at the general condition of the patient as orthopedic surgeons, and not just only localize ourselves to the surgical management of it. And I think that's about it. And Dr. Tripathi and Dr. Armugam, if you have anything to add, please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Raja, and thank you, Dr. Tripathi. It was a very nice session, and thanks for moderating us all through very well and guiding us through. I would like to thank Torrent as well as for having us here. Hope it was a little enlightening to all our listeners, and thanks for the opportunity. Thank you all. It was very nice interacting with both of you, Dr. Tripathi and Dr. Ajay.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Ajay. I think it was a very nice moderation, and we have seen through all the cadaveric workshops in Ramaiah.
Yes.
Yeah, so it was nice to see you again there. And thank you, Dr. Armugam. I think we have very nice interaction, very nice presentation, and thank you, Torrent guys. Torrent, they have given the good platform to interact with all from the three parts of this country, from the north, from the mid, from the south. I think it was a very good.
Yeah, good evening, sir. Thank you for giving your valuable time.
Thank
yes,
you.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
We need a comprehensive presentation by both the speakers. So I thank Dr. Armugam sir and Dr. Tripathi sir for sharing the insights on osteoarthritis and osteoporosis management. And also I thank Dr. Ajay sir for moderating the session in a very interesting manner. And also all the participants for a patient listening. So please take care of yourself and be safe from the house of Shelcal. Thank you. Thanks you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.